Hi, this is Janet Fitch, and it is noon on Wednesday, so it must be Writing Wednesday, where I answer your writing questions and hopefully solve some problems if you have any. And I'm sure you don't. I'm the only writer who ever has writing problems. But if you do, feel free to share them in the comments, and I will do my darndest to help you out. Um, and if you have questions in between Wednesdays, you can send them to me on my website, janetfitchwrites.com, and I can design a Writing Wednesday around your question. So let's talk about what's been going on in my writing life. Right now, I am reading, among other things, I'm reading a book called Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, who is a Mexican writer, I believe, Veracruz. And it's a tale. It is really a told tale. She's been compared with Bolaño, 2666. She's been compared with Faulkner to a certain degree. I feel more Marquez about her. Hi, Jeffrey. She, especially in the way this book is written, it's written very much like Autumn of the Patriarch, if anybody has read Marquez's Autumn of the Patriarch. It's a book that has very little, it's continuous sentence. I think there's like 3 sentences in the book, 3 periods. And everything else is done with phrasing, and there are commas aplenty, and which I believe the Marquez has punctuation, just not periods. But this has punctuation, just very few periods. And as you can see, there is some dialogue, but it is written in these it's one giant block of text. There are very few ongoing real-time scenes. There are a few, a sprinkling of them. But it's mostly like a tale told, and they're the stories of a few people, but involve the village that they're in, and it's nasty and brutish in many ways, which is, I guess, why they were thinking of Bolaño. It is the translation is amazing. It's told very much in the vernacular, so the translator finds ways of expressing things in English that give us a sense of the liveliness of whatever the Spanish was in ways that make sense to us. So, for instance, Grandma was prone to losing the plot from 1 minute to the next. I mean, that is nice translation. Ever since I've started following kind of the translation, I won't call it controversy, the translation conversation, because our friend Jennifer Croft, who was the translator for Olga Tarkovsky, Flights and the Book of Jacob, and went to Stockholm with her when she won the Nobel. And Jennifer has been prominent in the fight to get the translator credited on the book covers, which you can see is not on this book cover. But it's becoming a more interesting, it's becoming more conventional to put the translator on the cover, because the translator basically writes every word of the book, right? They find a way to express what was expressed in the foreign language, in the other first language. and thinking about how you translate it into English idiom. I had just finished the new translation of Beowulf, this fabulous feminist translation by Headley, Headley, and I think it was Maria Dalvana Headley. This one, I just think that the translator adds so much to it. If it's in slang in the Spanish, it should be in slang in the English, and then trying just to find the language and the tone of contemporary language that I heard in Beowulf, and it's being done again in this. I just thought it's so well done. And the voice of the book, the points of view of these great blocks of copy, the point of view seems to be, there's some different points of view, but most of it seems to be like the point of view of the village, of people who have, or someone who has watched all of these events unfold and is telling you the story. But then you also get internals, and you get, the voice of the village. And a book like this is way worth studying and pulling apart and just, okay, now who's speaking? Do you think this is a villager? Do you think this is somebody in the village, somebody in particular in the village? Is this the person narrating their own story in that part of the book? It's a very short book, and yet it's pretty dense because of this writing style. And it reminds me of not only of Autumn the Patriarch and Marquez, and this talking from the kind of the collective village in which it takes place. It also reminds me of a wonderful book called Palinuro of Mexico by Fernando del Paso, which is just a really linguistically extravagant book. It's just like Joyce on speed or something. Not speed, maybe ecstasy. And it also is written with those big blocks. Let's see if I have that within arm's reach so I can show it to you. Palinuro of Mexico. It's one of my favorite books. It sometimes has the speed of that. Hi, Deidrea. Hi, Susie. Nice to see you. It is the thing about reading, an experimental fiction like this, of something that is interesting in form, and something where the author is trying to do something specifically with the form, is not only to read it, but to think about what they're doing in choosing that form. First of all, this is a tale told rather than a story experienced. So what do you gain? What do you lose in using a storyteller like this? And thinking about like who exactly is your narrator, who exactly is, and does it change as you go through, and noticing how the transitions between points of view, very subtle sometimes, between the village, the voice of the village, the voice of one maybe villager, like somebody who might live on that street, and then into the character. It's if you note those places to yourself, that takes like a close reading. But as writers, that's what we're doing when we read. We don't just gobble it up without like eating popcorn in front of the TV. We don't just consume it without noticing. We actually, if you read something that's worth taking part like this, do notice the fingerprints of the translator. Like a good tasty phrase is not necessarily going to be is not necessarily what was in the original. That is the sensibility of often the sensibility of the translator that you're seeing. So that makes it really interesting. Here's a long sentence in this. So I'm talking about hurricane season, which I'm reading right now and thinking a lot about. There's a long sentence about this kind of wastrel son or uncle of the speaker, and who worked as a musician and kind of hung out and basically was panhandling. In fact, he continued sponging off his mother, and she'd help him out whenever he asked, lending money that the effer never paid back. And on top of that, she was always taking him to get cleaned up whenever he got into scuffles on nights out. There's a lot of semicolons in here. It's the way that she avoids the period. And for several years even made the quite staggering sacrifice of traveling all the way to Puerto to visit him inside in jail. And this is something that Fernando del Paso does in Palinur of Mexico as well. It's like, how do you keep that sentence from ending? How do you keep it up in the air? Lists, dependent clauses. So here we go. All the way to Puerto to visit it inside. Every Sunday without fail, she'd visit Uncle Murillo, who was doing time for murder. And a really bright effing idea, some guy from Matacacuite, and all because Murillo was effing his whore of a wife, and she'd buckled under the hiding her husband gave her and ended up spilling her guts. And then we finally get to a period. But there's the fingerprint of the translator. She'd buckled, spilling her guts. I don't think that was what exactly the cognate would be in the original. So it's very interesting to see also in third person when it is kind of the character, like this is Yesenia's point of view, sort of. But then she'll say things like, to talk about the mother bringing him his cigarettes, a few centavos, his soap, and some provisions that she brought all the way from Villa, the town where they live, always going alone because she didn't want Yesenia and the other girls going. So is that Yesenia's point of view, or is it slightly outside Yesenia's point of view to say that? You learn a lot from studying a book like this. I love this style, and one of the exercises that I give if I had you in class, and one of the exercises that you would be doing is something that I call the long sentence, the 10-minute sentence. And what you do is so this is an exercise I can give you right now, is that you write a sentence for 10 minutes. And everywhere that you would normally put a period, you put a comma, and you keep the sentence going. It's like playing with a balloon back and forth and keeping it off the ground. So you're keeping that sentence from ending. How do you keep it from ending? And then you start noticing the ways that you can use dependent clauses to keep a sentence going, the way lists come in, the way prepositional phrases after this, before this, when so-and-so, under, over, because if you do it and then you look at the words that make the connectives, so you do the exercise, you get a big chunk you'll end up with a big chunk of text like this, the 10-minute sentence. And what will happen is you will see the words that are keeping the balloon from hitting the ground. Um, and then you can look at your own writing, and if you notice that it tends to be that you tend to use regular short sentence, and that you don't have much variety in your in the length of your sentences. This will help you, show you a way to go to lengthen some of those sentences, to combine some of your ideas into a longer, more complex sentence instead of 3 short sentences. How would you combine those to make one long sentence? So I don't mean run-on sentences. Everybody, always is up in the air about run-on sentences. Now, run-on sentences are sentences that kind of miss their ending. There's a place where they logically end, and you just keep going. In that case, there's a strong place in the sentence, and that should be at the end. And then you fold all that other material into the sentence so that it either comes into the beginning, as an introductory clause, or you work it into the center so it doesn't trail off. That's what we call run-on sentence. Nobody wants to, once you've made your point, you don't need to keep going. Cut that off and move it inside the sentence. Much, much better. So let's see, I'm completely open today as to what you might want to talk about. I am dealing with, in my own writing, I got hung up this week a couple of different ways, by which I mean that how you feel you can't get any further, or you don't know where to go. So that's what I kind of entitled this Writing Wednesday, is like, what's next? How do you find the next thing? Yeah, I had written a pretty good chapter. I felt pretty happy with it. And so immediately, I don't know what to do next. And this is, my teacher, Kate Braverman, used to call this, used to say, there's no such thing as a permanent state of grace. Ergo, that you get something really good, and the next thing you write is going to be terrible. Always works that way. And you find yourself, I don't know what to do next. When you don't know what to do next, don't get hung up on what happens chronologically next, because you will. Obviously, you tried and you couldn't get anything. You didn't know what to do next, so you're obviously already hung up on it. And what I advise people to do is to think about a scene that you're going to have to write. And it doesn't necessarily come next. It's just a scene that you can imagine pretty clearly that's going to happen. And write that scene. And then worry later about how you're going to work it in. You don't worry about transitions, in other words. You could go, your character is going to end up in Helsinki, say. But you don't know how you're going to get them from the fabulous scene in New Orleans you just wrote, to Helsinki and the dying mother. It's like you have no idea what are the steps from Mardi Gras to Helsinki and the dying mother. You just know that that's going to be part of your book. So instead of sweating too hard to get from New Orleans, Mardi Gras, barfing on Bourbon Street, recovering by the river, blah, 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 how you're going to get them to Helsinki, to the mother's bedside. Just go ahead and go to the mother's bedside, write that scene, and then take I hope you all have 3-hole punch by this time. You get a big 3-hole punch. You can punch let's see, where's my 3-hole punch? So I can illustrate my methods. I usually leave it on the windowsill so I can always find it. So a good 3-hole punch that you can do like 20 pages at a time. And print it out, 3-hole punch, stick it in a notebook and into a binder, into your novel you're building in the binder or in a box, But at this point I have a binder now for the novel. And then you just put it in there, and then you know that you're going to have to work that scene in there somehow. And you'll figure it out. You'll figure out how to get there. It's just, I can see how that I need that scene. And I can see that there's going to be a scene. And I can maybe picture the scene after it. And then I don't know what I'm doing again. And then I think again, okay, what scene can I see? Oh, I can see the son's wedding. I've always been able to see the son's wedding. Okay, so write the son's wedding, and you'll figure out how your character gets from his dying mother bedside in Finland to his son's wedding. You'll figure it out. Just write the scene, get it in the notebook or in a box or something, and then you can worry later, how do you get from one to the other? It will be so liberating for you not to be suffering to get from how to what chronologically and have to do what I think they call it in theater, they call it the obligatory scene, or maybe in film, the obligatory scene. You don't have to write the obligatory scene. Write the scene that you see really clearly, and then you can figure out how to get them from one to the other. Readers of novels have seen a lot of movies, and you know what? A cut and then a sudden change of location doesn't throw them. They really don't have to go from one scene to another. The writer often has to, or thinks they have to, but in fact, you don't. You can go right from face down on Bourbon Street during Mardi Gras, and then suddenly you're walking into the mother's room in Finland. And then they can catch up. And how did you get there and stuff. You can do that in a sentence. And you can do it later. You don't have to do it on this draft. So I had one of those where I just had this beautiful chapter, and it was perfect, and it was in chronological order. And then I had no idea what would happen with the next scene. So I just leapt into a scene that I knew was going to come. And, you whack your way through a book. It's not, and then. You can flash ahead to something that you see. Or you can write these individual scenes, and sometimes they come earlier than you thought. Sometimes you take that scene of the dying mother in Finland and you end up putting it early on in the book. So the connective tissue would have worked against you because you would have had to rip it out to put that scene earlier on. So I know that I've had friends who've taught those, they've taught those classes of write a novel in 12 weeks, Well, you cannot write a novel in 12 weeks. You're not going to write a novel in 12 weeks. I'm sorry. NaNoWriMo is fabulous, the 1 month. Write a novel in a month. NaNoWriMo is coming. It's November. So if anybody can still have energy after the election. But what you can do in a month is pinpoint, say, 12 essential scenes that you can see that have to be in the book. And then write those scenes. It might take more than a month, but it's using the time in the most efficient way rather than trying to construct a chronology that you might have to rip into, and it'll be harder when these scenes are knit into some narrative. It's often hard to rearrange them once you've done that. So I'd say hold the order of things lightly and write the scenes that need to be written, and you will figure out eventually what to do with them. The other thing that you can do if you're stuck and you don't know what's next is, where's my little bag of tricks? You can take a word and write off of a word, and you might find that that's exactly what you needed to write next. Like the next word here is snow. Maybe the next time I get stuck, I'll just write 2 pages double-spaced using the word snow in there somewhere and allow that to grow and start to absorb the concerns of the book and become the next chapter. That the more linear you are when you're creating a novel, the less likely you are to tap into your own unconscious material. This is somebody who, I do not plan my novels because of this, because I like things to arise from the unconscious rather than from planning on a conscious level. Some people like to plan on the conscious level, but they hold that plan lightly. So if other things come up that are more that are attached to the unconscious, that have roots in you, and things arise, hold that plan lightly so that you can use this material as it comes up. So Malika says, my first draft was more creative nonfiction, but there's some danger in that. Here's a question. Have you thought of writing narrative nonfiction? Oh, this is a question to Malika. With fact and fiction, how far can you go fictionalizing real life? I fictionalize the hell out of it. I fictionalize the hell out of real life. Last week I decided not to make her novel in the Bronx and keep it in San Francisco. But the school that was involved in the controversy is in San Francisco, could get riled up. So just change everything. Change the names of the schools for sure. What can be done so honestly submit to a small press? I would call it a novel. I would call it a novel, and I would make it a novel. That's what I would do. But I'm a fiction writer. If I was trying to write about an historical event or a political moment or piece of history or controversy, and I was writing about the real thing, then I'd have an obligation to write about the real thing. If I wanted just to write about this kind of thing, I would make the whole thing up and use everything in it, but try to make it less recognizable. Let's see, there was another question in here. How far can you go fictionalizing real life? Depends on if you're presenting it as fact. You cannot fictionalize it very much. You can flesh it out, but you can't change say if I'm writing about a a harassment event at some famous private school, say, and it happened at Stanford, but I don't want to say it's Stanford. You can hedge, you can go, a very famous West Coast university, but do you want to do that throughout a book? That's a little, that's a lot of unnecessary vagueness. If you want to, but you can't make it about USC if it happened at Stanford. You can't make it about, you know, another school unless you want to fictionalize it, and you just give the school a different name. You call it, Seahorse University, whatever, and then you can stick to the facts, or you can write fiction. I'm big on fiction, but that's me. Lily says, this is where I get temporarily stuck. I need a prompt to start the next scene. Yeah, I have a big picture of where the novel's going, but need something I can picture in my mind first and take a while. Yeah. When you don't know what comes next, see if you can ask yourself, what do I see? What picture do I see? What scene do I see? When I was writing White Oleander, for instance, one of the first scenes I saw was a girl dyeing somebody's hair. And I liked the scene because it's intimacy. There's an intimacy to, if you've ever dyed somebody's hair for them, it's very close work. You're in a bathroom, very closed in, and you're hunched over them, and they're either in a towel or they're in some state of disrobement. I used to dye my mother's hair for her, and it's a very intimate thing, even when it's your mother, but imagine doing it for a foster mother, or somebody you don't know very well. It's kind of disgusting. Well, I saw that very clearly, that scene. I wrote that scene, and then I wrote that a couple of scenes after that, but I didn't know where in the novel that would go. I thought, it was fairly early on when I wrote it. If I had written it chronologically, and then, it would have been harder to pull it out and put it where it ended up being. But I put it where I thought it went, and then it just didn't seem to go well as the first place she went after foster care. My character goes into foster care. So I just put a big sheet in it saying something here to come, TK, and knew that I needed to write a scene there. Well, actually, I wrote a group home, and I wrote a first foster home before I wrote that, before I caught up to where I had written to. So having something like this, if you need a prompt to start the next scene, I have this little purse, and it's full of words. Little words. And most of them are words that are either a verb or a noun. So in this case, snow. It can snow, verb, or it can be the noun. And, thinking of the different things it might mean in terms of if you're looking for the next chapter of a book, think, snow, how would that fit into this book that I'm writing? Maybe it's set in Palm Springs and snow. Okay, so what's the snow? Do we go to the snow? Does it snow? Do I see snow on the mountains? Where am I that I'm seeing that snow? What does it mean to me at the time? Is, somebody bringing some blow into town? We're waiting for the man. I mean, all the different ways that snow could be. Um, so that's an idea. You can try the 10-minute sentence. Um, you can pick a first sentence or first phrase to kick you off. You know, when Michelle woke at 4 in the afternoon, comma, or whatever might be appropriate to your book. And then you write for 10 minutes and everywhere you would normally end the sentence, you put a comma and you keep going. I mean, that would be a good kickoff for the next scene. The other thing you can do is use a photograph. And you just look at the photograph and you say, okay, now this is going to be Anna, and this is going to be Dave, and this is, I don't even know who that is. And then you start writing, riffing off the photograph. I think that whenever we reach the end of what we know, or the end of a stretch of narrative, we just don't know what is going to happen next. It's a good time to kind of open up the unconscious, get back in touch with this huge, shadowy abundance of story and language and psychology and understanding that you are made of, the stuff you are made of. And if working off of that, you get some unconscious help. If you don't have, if you're not working so purposefully all the time, I think that's what happens with mediocre books, is that they don't go into the unconscious. They don't try to reach down far enough into the individual writer, that you go down far enough that you start pulling up stuff that is, more bigger fish down there. You're not just skittering after a bunch of sardines. It's like you get down far enough and all kinds of stuff, weird and wonderful stuff is down there. What else can I do for you? So Heidi says, I'm in the process of taking all my subconscious writing of vivid scenes I saw and trying to put them in chronological order so it won't be backstory. Yeah, that's a really good thing to do. So you take your 3-hole punch, and you get your ring binder, and you start seeing how you can get a flow and moving material around, and then noticing what still has to be written. Something to get Johnny from Tucson to Phoenix. I've got like 3 scenes that are the same two people interacting. I need to break that up. I need a scene in here that's just with this one character and somebody else, or by themselves, or with a group of people. I always try to break up the patterns. So if there are too many 2-person scenes, we've just had 2-person scenes, then it's like, I need a group scene here, or I need a solo scene here. If there's too many, scenes in the house, it's like, I need something outdoors here. I need something, too many day scenes. I need something night scene here, So you can, just looking to vary number of people in the scene, day, night, interior, exterior, just those. Trying to vary those will give you all kinds of ideas. I have a house in my novel, and I necessarily have to spend a lot of time in that house. So I have a scene now that I've written the scene, but not really written it. I've just written the conflict of the characters, but I haven't set it anywhere. And you know me, it's like setting is really important to me. And I don't want it to be in that house. So I'm going to set it in going somewhere in a car. It's a phone call, getting a phone call in the car, and then having to pull over, because then you have a different world to look at and think about as you're on the phone, rather than I'm in the kitchen, I'm in the bedroom. It's like, done it. Too much of that. So Jill says, do you separate scenes with dividers? No, I do not. Once it's in the notebook, I'm trying to look at the relationships, the movement from scene to scene to scene, and to make dividers would be counterproductive. I want to see what was before that and what was before that. I might even, if I was good with spreadsheets, which I'm not, I would do a spreadsheet that would include day, night, interior, exterior, location, number of people in the scene. And I look at that and go, oh my God, too many twos, too many interior day. Let's change this up. Let's see what else you guys want to know. Yeah, it's like, what's next? It does help to have a bag of tricks as far as prompts, photographs, certain people's photographs. When I was working on Marina M and Chimes of Lost Cathedral, especially Marina M, I had a book of photographs by Deborah Tuberville, a very famous photographer, who had a photo series called Studio St. Petersburg. And they were very interesting photographs of they looked a lot like post-World War II photographs of Russia after the bombings, the palaces and stuff that were like completely torn up. But also after the revolution, they were a lot of buildings were pretty torn up. And if you read the novel, you would see that, people were using the banisters and stuff for firewood. So revolutionary housing had a certain look. And yet the elegant details remained in these ruined buildings. And it really inspired me. I saw characters. Some of the faces just really reminded me of my characters. And the drama elicited a certain level of emotion that I found extremely, extremely helpful. So in general, I work in kind of a musical way where it's like a symphony, like what comes next. You don't follow, allegro. With allegro, you change it up. So when you're thinking what comes next, also think of kind of emotionally what should come next. You don't want heavy scene after heavy scene after heavy scene. Or I don't anyway. I like to really vary the emotion as well, so that when somebody reads my books, they know I might have some heavy stuff in there, but there's also going to be some lift, some distance, some lift, some blue sky as well, so they know they're going to get a range of experiences. That's what I like. What else? Ask me anything. Very open to this. Yeah, and always what to put in backstory and what to put in front story is, that everybody's got that problem. in general, favor the front story. See how much you can put in front story. But everybody has a life, has already lived a life. I think bad fiction people tend not to have had a varied backstory. They just, mommy, like they have the trauma story, but they might not have, a story of some good times, some beautiful moments. You want those little shots of color as well. So Roberta, thank you. She likes the prompt pick pouch. Yeah, so what I did was I wrote lists of words that short, basic words: plate, door, window, oven, paddle, etc. Long lists of words. And the more that could be both verb and noun, the better. Brick, chair, table. And then I just cut them up into little strips like this, and filled that pouch. And every once in a while, I need a prompt. I'll pull one of those out. Very useful. Who else is having any kind of difficulty with something? Yeah, the told to story, like the hurricane season that I'm reading now, is you can really move around a lot in what happened when you were a kid, or when your character was a kid, inform in a flash. But if it needs a dramatic scene, then you think about how it can be part of the narrative. Here's a question. Heidi says, I feel like I have too much material because I've lived it. Oh, so this is a nonfiction problem. That's a nonfiction problem. I have so much to say, it all leads to the conflict. Yeah, that's because it's not fictionalized yet. I mean, if you're writing a novel, then you have to really think of the character as not you, and make them in some basic way not you, and have things happen in ways that have events that are informed by what happened to you, but are not just writing about what happened to you. It might have started out being you. That might have been your first impulse to write whatever it is that you're writing. But if you really set yourself aside, or if in your mind it works better for you, imagine taking the character off of you and putting them in front of you or next to you, so that it's not you, it's this character. And any change makes a huge difference. If you're a small person, make them a big person. Physically inhabit a different body. It's very useful. Have them like things you don't like. Have them temperamentally different from you. I know we've talked about the art of dramatic writing, which I recommend you not follow. Do not read it. Do not follow it. But it has the best section on they call it the three-dimensional character study. So the three dimensions being physical, psychological, and sociological. So as you go through and you're using the three-dimensional character study, make them different from you, make their physicality different from you, their race, their religion, their political affiliations, their education, their, if you're an introvert, make them an extrovert, have them have very different reactions to situations than you do, and give them a structure, family structure, what happened to them with their family, who they are. If you're an only child, give them siblings, create a character, in other words, that isn't you. And then then it's not the life you've lived. It's this person has their own life, their own reasons for doing things, their own level of, spontaneity, courage. My God, Marina M., this is a girl who is so much more daring than I ever am, And it was the thing that helped me make a character, is to have a character who, in the face of a certain challenge, will step up to the challenge. Whereas in life I might be much more like, oh my God, I gotta go see my shrink, or yeah, no, not going with you, honey. Whereas I need a character who would go, yeah, you're pretty cute, okay. You do want, this is the thing about writing about events that have happened to you, or writing around in the province of things that have happened to you. It's never going to be exactly the way it happened, because in fiction you can heighten the meaning of things. Like, what, yeah, this happened, this girl was mean, shoved you off your bicycle, stole the bicycle. But in adult fiction, nobody wants to read about another kid steals their bike. It's like, but you can use those same feelings in a carjacking. Something that makes more sense to an adult, of more interest to an adult reader. You can heighten the whole thing by remembering to create a character rather than using yourself as a fictional character. And then it's got to be your grandmother, and you've got to explain why your grandmother is like that, and she was born in Brooklyn. And you know how it is when you get family storytellers, they start way back. You got to understand why the grandmother is the way she is, to understand the way the mother is the way she is, to understand the way the daughter is, and they never even get to the story. Fictional characters don't have quite as big a backstory as you do. And so if you can make it a character, you can confine yourself to the story you're telling and not your story, which is just way too big. Yeah, so that'll help you prune out unnecessary stuff. So Malika's question, based on a true story to solve her problem. Dedry is working on historical fiction with a true story that had to be condensed because of the timeline, yeah. But if it's true story, I mean, I always like to fictionalize more rather than less, but I understand that this is a specific love affair and somebody's life that is just amazing, and that for various reasons you didn't want to write straight history. You wanted to make a novel out of it. So I understand that. So John Young says, creating a bone structure helps me in writing screenplays, which I learned from the art of writing. Yes, I this book is perfect for the dramatic arts, but fiction writers get carried astray by this book. I wasted so much of my young writing life trying to make this work in fiction, and it never occurred to me this is not for fiction writers. This is for playwrights and screenwriters. Mainly because they have you like pick a theme before you even know what you're writing. That doesn't work for fiction writers. We have to have the material has to come up from the unconscious, and then you sort it out afterwards. Towards the end, when you have the whole thing, then you can kind of raise the Titanic. It's a little bit different. So Steve, hey Steve, fourth draft of his novel, yay! I've noticed many scenes occur within certain chapters, almost a composite of what is happening simultaneously on board the ship. Any advice? So he's got simultaneity. This is happening on the bridge, and this is happening in the stern, and this is happening in the hold. I don't see a problem with that. I don't see a problem with that. Do you feel that the setup becomes repetitive? I think that is it important for us to know this is going on simultaneously? If not, then they can just be regular chapters. The simultaneity, if it's important to the development of the story that these things are happening simultaneously, the plotting below decks as the captain is, having his lunch and thinking he's in such good shape, and then, there's mutiny on afoot. I think that often you can decide, do we need all of them? Or is it just planning the mutiny enough? And then a scene with the captain and telling, the owner, writing to the owners that all is well and that kind of thing. That's what I'm thinking. But certain chapters could be a composite. That's interesting. Yeah, you have to ask yourself if you need it, because it's interesting, but interesting things like that, how much do you want to repeat them? Because things that are interesting the first couple of times you see them become like a shtick. It's like, oh yeah, I've seen the simultaneity thing enough. It's like a montage in a film where they show the falling in love and all. It's always the montage, the tandem bicycle ride and the candlelight dinner and the rustling under the sheets and just moving us through. You don't want a lot. You get one montage. That's about it. You don't want to see it over and over again. Worried about covering too much. Steve says he was worried about covering. I know he's writing a big historical novel. Yeah, you ask yourself which is essential. What is essential? Is it essential to know that this is all happening simultaneously, or can you pick the important piece here? Is it the plotting of the mutiny is the important thing, and the captain's reassuring the investors is just like a grace note? That's my sense of it. Well, it looks like we have longitudinal writing is for epics. I found it more exciting to find a couple of things and put in a timeline that brings urgency. That's interesting. I think that this big historical novel that Steve is writing is more like Marina M. Because it's on it's a big historical world that he wants to depict as well as his specific story. All right. Well, listen, thank you very much for joining us for Writing Wednesday. I wish you good writing. If you do NaNoWriMo, think about, like just the fence posts, the scenes that you're going to need, rather than trying to write a novel in a month. So Steve is now reading The Recognitions by Gaddis. This is one of the great, I guess you would call it experimental novels. And it is convoluted, tiring, but fascinating. Yeah, like this, it's like people who write experimental fiction. They're usually experimenting with form, with the storytelling. And, Gaddis in particular, that book, he does not want to make it easy for you. He wants the reader who's going to meet him halfway and slug it through with him. He's not as worried about losing readers. And that's a question that every writer has to figure out, is how much do you want your reader to stay with you, every reader to be able to stay with you? Is there something for the demanding reader who wants to be challenged, as well as the person who just wants to read a good story? Some people just want to write for the reader who wants a good story and, isn't really worried about the more sophisticated reader. Some people want to make sure that there's something for the sophisticated reader as well, but that anybody could follow it with a little bit of work. And then some people just do not care. And they have an idea of what they want it to look like and how they want to tell it, and they go for it. And this is what people like Fernando Melchor and Fernando Del Paso are like. Whereas you have somebody like Marquez, and he's got something for everybody. I mean, I don't think the average person muscled their way through the Autumn of the Patriarch, but they certainly loved, 100 Years of Solitude, Love in Time of Cholera. He wrote for everybody, with something for the sophisticated reader. That's a really nice place. All right. Write well, and we'll see you next week for Writing Wednesday.